Hello and welcome to another Hawker Brownlow Education author interview. Today I am delighted to be joined by Dr Janelle Wills, author of Thinking Protocols for Learning. Janelle might be best known to you as a presenter and speaker at many of our professional learning events. Now, as author, Janelle has written a resource that will help students navigate the complexities and challenges of a rapidly changing world through the explicit teaching of thinking. And I'd like to welcome author of Thinking Protocols for Learning, Dr. Janelle Wills. Janelle, welcome.
Thank you, Richard.
Now, I've got to ask, what got you thinking about thinking?
It's something I never stopped doing, really. It's something I've always been incredibly passionate about. Back in my early teaching career, it's one of the things that I loved teaching. I loved pushing kids' thinking a little bit and, not just regurgitating facts, but really thinking creatively, thinking critically, all those sorts of things. To be honest, I think, and I strongly believe, we dropped the ball on it big time. We had the education revolution that brought us NAPLAN and wonderful things like that. And don't get me wrong, NAPLAN has a place, but we've ended up with a very overcrowded curriculum, and that one of the costs of that has probably been that the explicit teaching of thinking has gone by the wayside. So, yeah, I just decided it was time to really champion it again. And as I've worked with teachers a lot as well across Australia, they would often say to me, as I was sharing resources and ideas, they'd say, well, where do you find all of this in one spot? So I guess my book is that one-stop shop for all things thinking.
And these are pretty important concepts, aren't they? How are they being taught? Like pre-education revolution, did they have a place in schools as a standalone sort of thing?
Well, they should never be standalone, actually. And really the teaching of thinking dates back to, people like Plato and Aristotle. But what's important is that thinking should never be viewed as a standalone, or sometimes where people will default to, well, I don't have time for that. Like, I've already got so much content, and it's almost sadly, content I've got to shove down kids' throats. The best way of teaching thinking is actually when it is embedded in the content and in the curriculum. The really good thing is that is how it's meant to be taught, and in the Australian curriculum it is recognised there. It's one of the general capabilities, but I guess teachers struggle sometimes with just, well, how do I do that practically? How do I ensure that, if I'm breaking kids into groups and all the rest of it, is their dialogue meaningful dialogue? Are they actually thinking at those higher levels, or just having a chat? So yeah, it's really important, but doesn't come without challenges, I guess, from a practical perspective.
Well, in the introduction to the book, you asked the question, are schools still needed? And your answer is a resounding yes. How do you think 2020, given what we've gone through so far this year, how do you think, has it changed at all?
I think it's actually strengthened it. I think what we saw, so it was a yes before and a resounding yes. Now it's even a stronger yes. And what we know, interestingly enough, I guess, the first day the kids were probably going, yay, no school in that traditional format. But what they missed was the social aspect of school. And by that, I don't mean it not just their friends, and getting together with their friends, but learning and thinking is very much a social process. You can't think alone, really. So that social aspect is incredibly important. And that's why I was saying in the front of the book, if school's just about the regurgitation of information and knowledge known so far, well then, it doesn't have a place. But school, in terms of what Susan Brockhart talks about of making kids human, as they debate and talk and, all the rest of it, that's when it definitely has a place. And very much so in this world at the moment, when there's so much change going on, that they really need to be able to think through that. What does that mean? What are the implications? to not actually see it all as bad, that these are wonderful opportunities as well that we're being presented with. Um, and then, you know, I raise the issue about it's also that notion of thinking ethically, you know, are these the right things to do, and all those sorts of things. So yeah, it's still, it has a place, an important place.
What do you think a school, whether it be the students or the teachers in the classroom, would get out of a book like this? What do you want their key takeaway to be?
You know, I'm a geek, an absolute geek. I love my research. So, you know, self-confessed, I'll own up to that. So there's plenty of research in the book. So I think the good thing for teachers and schools to know is that these aren't just, you know, here's an idea, go and test it out, that there's a really solid research base behind it all, but then lots and lots of practical strategies. And part of that has been where I sort of describe the strategy, but then different ways that might be applied, and specifically applied within the Australian curriculum. And a lot of these things have been tested as well. So tested either as I've been teaching, or over, gosh, the last 15, 20 years as I'm working with teachers and sharing these ideas, they also share with me about different ways of and ideas for implementing. So yeah, research, but lots of practical strategies.
And you mentioned working with schools there. A lot of schools would know you, particularly in Queensland and growing number of schools around the country, for your work with Marzano Resources, with New Art and Science of Teaching, and the High Reliability Schools framework. How does this book relate to those ideas?
Yeah, they're quite complementary. So it fits in with high reliability schools in terms of what Bob Marzano would talk about as level 3, the development of a guaranteed and viable curriculum. So Bob talks about the importance of the explicit teaching of cognitive skills and cognitive skills, which is coming through in the book in terms of cooperation, collaboration, teamwork, and then the higher levels of thinking. So it sits there. It's also embedded throughout the work of the New Art and Science of Teaching that I do as well. So there's a lot of work where we talk about different strategies for organising students to interact with knowledge. So it's a big part of my book. Where I'm really drawn to Bob's work is from the influence of cognitive psychology. So that's a big influence in my work as well. And particularly all of the work, there's a whole chapter that I've got around metacognition, and that's something I'm really passionate about, developing metacognitive skills. And Bob's work around proficiency scales is a brilliant tool and avenue for that. So I do touch on that in my book as well. So quite complementary.
Yeah. And just back to metacognition, could you give us a quick overview, if that's possible, of that area?
Yeah, well, metacognition, and it's again one of those things that as educators we've had in our jargon for quite some time, but it's one of those things that rolls off the tongue, but nobody ever stops to go, hang on, what does that actually mean? And as you can imagine, metacognition is like the literal term is cognition of cognition, thinking about thinking, but it's a lot more than that, as you can imagine. In actual, and the reason why I have it as the first chapter of my book is that as that higher level or metacognition, it controls all other levels of thinking. But it's a lot of the notion of kids being able to know, what they don't know, being able to regulate their own thinking processes, being aware of even the thinking that gets in the way of their learning, what Bob Marzano talks about as unproductive thoughts, habits of mind, you know, like things like the minute I'm presented with something challenging, I give up, you know, that sort of stuff. So getting kids to be really consciously aware of their thinking, but then very importantly as well, the strategies that they use that help them. So we're always saying, you know, this is a strategy that we're using. How does that help you in your thinking?
All right. Well, Janelle, your book, Thinking Protocols for Learning, is out and available now at hbe.com.au. It's a really wonderful read, and as you've said, a really useful resource for the classroom, not just theory and ideas, but really practical classroom-based stuff. So Janelle, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Richard. It's been fun. Thank you.